There's a lot to discuss this evening, and to help work through all of it, I'm joined by Camila DeChalus, senior reporter for Insider, Dean Obeidallah, MSNBC daily columnist, comedian and host of the Dean Obeidallah Show on Sirius XM, and Aida Rodriguez. Her comedy special, Fighting Words, is out now on HBO Max. It's great to have all three of you with us. Camila, I'd like to start with you. This is likely to be one of the most significant and dramatic weakenings of precedent we've seen in our lifetime. Just how flawed is this system when you have three people who can make the difference as to the liberties of 100 and I think 125 million women in this country?
Well, I think the biggest concern here is the public perception of the Supreme Court. You heard Justice Barrett and also now Justice Sotomayor talk about this concern that the public perception of the Supreme Court as being a partisan institution. And the problem with that is that when the public views the Supreme Court as being extremely politicized and partisan, is that it could undermine the legitimacy of the court and the rulings that it has, that it will bring down for months and then years to come.
Dean, the most problematic part of this is that this isn't something that the midterms of the 2024 election will be able to change, or even the 2022, to be honest. These justices will be in power for decades, and therefore, regardless of, the presidency or even the number of representatives that may come and go in any given year or off-term election, the GOP have the most power. They have the power to turn almost anything into policy with this. What do you make on what that means for the majority of Americans to have a say in the future of this country? I've tried to outline how I think and view the Supreme Court as now being undemocratic, and those that put it in power are not democratic. And you have this dynamic now where the majority, and that's how a democracy should function, the majority of the will of the people are not, or is not rather, being reflected in the Supreme Court.
Absolutely not. First of all, Eamon, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Second of all, you know what is the most stunning part of all of this? And I think people are uncomfortable to talk about it. This is about the GOP wanting to impose their extreme religious beliefs as the law of the land to oppress women. And I just heard the Taliban suing the GOP for trademark infringement. This is the Taliban's move. And I'm not saying the GOP and the Taliban are the same, but it is their playbook. It is turning their extreme religious beliefs into the law of the land. And here's the irony, Eamon. You and I are Muslim. They used to accuse us of wanting to do that in America. We didn't want to. They were projecting what they wanted to do. So only 30% of Americans want to overturn Roe. They don't care because, in their view, that's what their interpretation of their faith, and I call it GOP Sharia law. That's what they're trying to pose. It's GOP Sharia law, and if they're not going to stop there, they're going to come for birth control, marriage equality. Who knows what's next? Eamon, we have to have some response. Maybe we have to ban bacon. We have to ban pork. We have to do something as Muslims to push back on this. But the reality is that people should be, you don't want to live in a theocracy. You should be very upset because that's really, it's not a legal dispute.
Yeah.
This is taking extreme beliefs and turning it into the law of the land. And what about the rest of our religious liberty? The right loves to talk religious liberty. What about our religious liberty, the women's religious liberty to control their own body? They don't care. It's all been a lie by the right.
Yeah, and they don't want government interfering in their affairs either, except for when it suits them politically. Aida, and to Dean's point, quite honestly, this is not about abortion because the precedents that this would set is there is so much more on the GOP's agenda that they want the Supreme Court, as they have done in other cases with voting rights, but this time it could go even beyond that. You can take this and take the principle of what they're doing with overturning some of these decisions to things like gay marriage rights, gun rights, contraception. How worrying is it that all the progress that we have made as a country could be unraveled by this decision coming down in June if, in fact, Roe v. Wade is overturned?
Thank you for having me. In this company, I feel a little intimidated, but I will speak my piece as a stand-up comedian.
You should never be intimidated when Dean Obeidallah is on a panel. Let me just say that up front, okay?
Really? That's how we're going to start. That's how we're going to start it. Okay.
Whoa. But I will say this, as a person, a woman of color that identifies with her Blackness, I can't help but to point out how a lot of this stuff is rooted in it's race, good old American racism and the toxic capitalism that drives this country to keep people who are poor down. When you think about reproductive rights and you talk about women of color and the plagues that we have to deal with in our communities, and those that come from communities where we come from low income communities, these are just another way to hold this is just another way to hold poor people down. And you talk about these people who care so much about the unborn, but then show up not caring for them once they get here. And we hear the hypocrisy that comes from this party and the people who think like this, who don't care about these young Black and brown kids who are being, assassinated by law enforcement wrongfully, the children that were kidnapped that were from the border. You just talk about all of these people who are affected by this. They don't care about you. They don't want you to get food stamps. As the good old George Carlin would say, they don't want you to get health care, but they care about you when you're not here. And so when we talk about these people, we talk about the good old white supremacy that reigns supreme. And this is just another one of the exercises that they use to keep poor people, Black people, brown people, and marginalized people down.
Yeah, and I'm so
sorry, I didn't have.
No, I'm so glad you brought up that George Carlin quote, because I've seen it around, and it's one of the most powerful ones from anyone. It's really simple and it's very straightforward. At the end of the day, they care more about people before they're born. Once they're born, you're on your own. Camila, let's talk about what the Democrats can do here. They do have options. They could add justices. They could try to look at term limits for the Supreme Court. They could, if they wanted to do away with the filibuster, actually try to legislate some of these safeguards and liberties into law. Based on your reporting, do you expect that we will see any of that come to fruition? Do you see any movement on that front to try and codify or improve or reform the Supreme Court?
Yeah, I think depending on the outcome of this ruling, it could really make the issue of abortion rights one of the most defining issues in this upcoming midterm election. It's really interesting to note that Republicans have usually always geared to using this issue of abortion rights during Senate races and even presidential elections. But now you can see that Democrats will try to pivot and use this issue to really galvanize and motivate their base to go out and have voters go out to the polls and really vote in this election, because so much is at stake at hand. And so I think in these upcoming weeks and months ahead, it'll be really interesting to hear Democrats try to reignite the conversation about trying to restructure the Supreme Court and even trying to expand by adding on more justices. They talked about this months ago, but I think especially now that the Roe v. Wade case is now coming to the national forefront, Democrats are going to be expected to answer that question about what they can do to try to restructure this court, that it can become a little bit more nonpartisan.
Dean, you, besides being a part-time comedian, also have a Sirius XM show. You spend a lot of time getting the pulse of the people, getting the pulse of the politicians. Let's talk about that point that Camila was talking about there, the voter base. Because on one hand, Republicans, they're going to be celebrating. Trump kept his campaign promise. They managed to do what no one else did over 50 years, stack the court, overturn Roe versus Wade. That's going to play well with their religious base, their extremist base. On the other hand, though, you have Democrats that are likely to be frustrated and defiant in the face of this. What impact do you think this decision could have on 2022 and 2024? Does it favor one party over the other from your political analysis?
Look, when I talk to listeners to my show in the last few days since the Supreme Court decision, it's not just women who are upset. People from the LGBTQ community are very concerned as well, because they know they're coming for them. We all know this. We understand they've already gutted the Voting Rights Act. Who knows what else they're going to do along those lines? They're never going to stand up for voting rights. So there's going to be more pressure to revise the Supreme Court, to change it, to add some seats. That'll be one thing. There'll be pressure, most importantly, on the filibuster, on passing a Reproductive Freedom Act to codify essentially Roe versus Wade along those lines. But my concern is, Eamon, that Democrats are not delivering on these things, not because overwhelmingly Democrats in Congress want to, is that a couple of them, at least a couple, don't want to reform the filibuster. And they've chosen the filibuster over a working democracy.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, this is something that's zapping the enthusiasm of the Democratic base, and it's really alarming to me. So I'm very concerned about if Democrats don't reform the filibuster, they can't deliver to their base. And on voting rights, that's the biggest issue. And then this is part of it as well, freedom.
And I feel like every segment of the Democratic Party is coming under attack, whether, as you said, LGBTQ members, whether it's black voters, whether it is now women, and they are not coming to this fight ready to duke it out. They're still trying to build consensus and try to, find bipartisanship. I'm not sure it's going to work given the current climate. Camila, thank you so much for joining us. Ida, Dean, stick around. We have got a lot more to discuss. We're just getting started here. Next, big